Daf Yomi, tractate Zevachim, page 60b. Close to the top of the page, a few lines in, with the words Mal Bechor. Mal Bechor, Shekinton Matan Damim Vimorim Legamizbeach. Rabbi Shmuel notes that this derivation can be challenged. What is notable about a Bechor, a firstborn? Bringing the firstborn to Jerusalem is required only in the presence of the temple, because it is notable in that it requires placement of its blood and its sacrificial portions upon the altar. Will you say the same with regard to the second tithe produce, which requires only that it be consumed in Jerusalem? He continues, first fruits will prove that placement of blood upon the altar is not a factor, as they do not require placement of blood upon the altar, and yet they are brought to Jerusalem only in the presence of the temple. Rabbi Yishmael counters what is notable about first fruits. They are notable in that they require placement alongside the altar. Perhaps since second tithe produce does not require placement at all, even in the present one must bring it to Jerusalem and eat it there. Rabbi Shmuel concludes, therefore, the verse states, and there you shall bring your burnt offerings, and your sacrifices, and your tithes, and the firstborns of your herd and your flock. Deuteronomy 12:6. The Torah juxtaposes second tithe produce with the firstborn. Just as the firstborn offering may be eaten there, only in the presence of the temple, so too second tithe produce may be eaten there, only in the presence of the temple. The Gemara questions why a verse was needed to teach that second tithe produce may not be consumed nowadays, but let the logical derivation return, and the halacha will be derived from the common element between the halachot of firstborn animals and first fruits. Although each has a unique factor, they share a common element. They must be brought to Jerusalem, and that they may be eaten only in the presence of the temple. So too, second tithe produce, which also must be brought to Jerusalem, should be permitted for consumption only in the presence of the temple. The Gemara answers Rabbi Shmuel did not present this derivation because it can be refuted in the following manner. What is notable about the two sources? They share a common element. Both firstborn animals, first fruits, are notable in that they possess an aspect of being offered upon the altar. Since the second tithe produce does not share this characteristic, its halachot cannot be derived from those pertaining to firstborn animals and first fruits. The Gemara asks, what does Rabbi Shmuel hold? If he holds that the initial consecration of the temple sanctified it for its time and sanctified it forever, then it should be permitted to build an altar and sacrifice offerings even nowadays, and therefore even a firstborn animal may be eaten. And if he holds that the initial consecration of the temple area did not sanctify it forever, let the dilemma be raised with regard to firstborn as well. Ravina said that actually Rabbi Shmuel holds that the initial consecration of the temple did not sanctify it forever. And although one cannot slaughter the firstborn to begin with, here we are dealing with the firstborn that was slaughtered and whose blood was sprinkled on the altar before the destruction of the temple, and then the temple was destroyed, and the meat of the firstborn still exists. It is prohibited to eat the meat of the firstborn in this case because its meat was juxtaposed with its blood, which is mentioned in the previous verse. As it is stated, you shall sprinkle their blood, and you shall burn their fat, and their flesh shall be yours. Numbers 18, 7 through 18. The juxtaposition teaches that just as his blood is sprinkled only on the altar, so too its meat may be consumed only in a time when there is an altar, and the case of second tithe produce comes and is derived from the case of a firstborn. Consequently, second tithe produce may not be consumed unless there is an altar. The Gemara asks, but does the matter derived via juxtaposition with another case then teach that the halacha applies to a third case via a juxtaposition between the second and third cases? There's a principle that this is not a valid method of deriving halachot pertaining to consecrated matters, since the halacha with regard to the meat of the firstborn offering is derived from the juxtaposition of the meat with the blood of the firstborn. One cannot then prove that the same halacha applies to second tithe produce simply because it's juxtaposed in a verse with the meat of the firstborn. The Gemara answers second tithe grain is non-sacred, and therefore the acceptable methods of deriving its halachot are not limited in this manner. The Gemara asks, this works out well according to one who says, in determining whether the derivation involves consecrated matters or whether it involves non-sacred matters, we follow the matter that is derived from a matter derived from a juxtaposition. Since in this case the matter derived is the second tithe produce, which for these purposes is non-sacred, its legal status may be derived from juxtaposition with the halacha of sacrificial matters. But according to one who says, we follow the matter that teaches, meaning from which the halacha is derived. What is there to say? The status of second tithe produce may not be derived by means of juxtaposition with the status of the firstborn offering, which itself is derived from the blood of the offering, because the firstborn offering is a sacrificial matter. Gemara answers, this is not a matter derived from a juxtaposition, as the status of firstborn offering is not derived from the status of blood. Blood and meat are one matter. There is only one derivation in this case, which is that the status of second tithe produce is derived from the status of the blood and the meat of the firstborn. In any event, Avaya has proven, quoting Rabbi Shmuel's statement cited by Rabbi Yossi, that even sacrificial items of lesser sanctity may not be eaten if the altar is missing or damaged. Ki saluk ravim amna shma'ata kamud Rabbi Yirmiyah amar bivavlai tipshai am tulias bi'ara dechashocha amar shma'ata demashcha Dilo Shemiano Hadetani Shatsiruk Masaod Kadashim Misolim Izavim Mitzoraim Mishtalchim Chutz Lamechitza. The Gemara relates from Rav descended from Babylonia to Eretz Israel. He stated this halacha that even items of lesser sanctity are disqualified if the altar is damaged or missing. In the presence of Rabbi Yirmiyah said, foolish Babylonians, because they dwell in a dark land, they state halachot that are dim. Have they not heard that which is taught in the Braita? At the time when the Jewish people would dismantle the tabernacle in order to depart on their journeys in the wilderness, sacrificial food was disqualified from being consumed, since the altar was not in place. Nevertheless, Zavim and lepers were sent out of the relevant partition. A Zav was sent out of the Levite camp, and a leper was sent out of the Israelite camp. It is taught in another Braita, sacrificial food could be consumed in two locations, meaning one could eat it while the tabernacle was in place, and one could continue eating it after the tabernacle had been disassembled and transported. What? Is it not that this first Braita is referring to offerings in the most sacred order, and that second Braita is referring to offerings of lesser sanctity? Accordingly, Abaya's statement that offerings of lesser sanctity may not be consumed if the altar is damaged is incorrect. Amravina, Ravina said that there is an alternative reconciliation of the two Braitot. Both this Braita and that Braita are referring to offerings of lesser sanctity, and it is not difficult.